Elliot Grayson was 64 years old, and the city knew him as a legend. From the top floor of the Grayson Global Tower, he could see the river, the bridges, and the endless movement of people rushing to places he no longer visited. Elliot had built his empire with patience, sharp thinking, and years of sacrifice. People admired his success, but few knew him beyond his public image. Inside the glass-walled office, the air felt quiet and heavy. "Another meeting canceled?" Elliot asked without looking up. His assistant, Nora Blake, hesitated. "Yes, sir. The investors said they can reschedule." Elliot sighed. "They always can." When Nora left, he leaned back in his chair and whispered to no one. All this work, and for what? His wife had passed away years ago, and they never had children. Friends had faded as business grew. That morning felt like any other until Nora returned, her voice uncertain. "Mr. Grayson, there's a child downstairs. He says he needs to see you." Elliot frowned. "A child?" "Yes, sir. He insists." Elliot stood, annoyed. "Fine. 5 minutes." He expected a prank or a mistake, not a thin boy with nervous eyes and a worn backpack. The boy stood straight and said, "My name is Caleb Morris. I was told you would know who I am." Elliot raised an eyebrow. "I don't," he replied. Caleb swallowed hard. "My grandmother did. Her name was Evelyn Morris." At the sound of that name, something shifted inside Elliot, like a door opening in a room he had locked away decades ago. Elliot motioned for the boy to sit, though his voice remained firm. "Who sent you here?" Caleb answered quietly, "My grandmother passed away last month. Before she died, she told me to come to you." Elliot's jaw tightened. "That's not an explanation." Caleb reached into his backpack and pulled out a folded, yellowed envelope. "She said this would help." Elliot took it slowly, recognizing his own handwriting before he even opened it. His breath caught. The paper trembled slightly in his hand. "This can't be," he muttered. Caleb watched him closely. "She worked for you. Long ago." Elliot closed his eyes, memories rushing back. Late nights, empty offices, and Evelyn Morris typing letters with calm loyalty when the company was nothing but a dream. "She believed in me when no one else did," Elliot said softly, more to himself than to the boy. Caleb nodded. "She said you promised her something." Elliot opened the letter. The words were simple, written in ink that had faded but not disappeared. "If I ever succeed, I will make sure your family is never left behind." Elliot let out a long breath. "I was young," he whispered. "I didn't think this promise would ever return." Caleb shifted in his chair. "She never forgot it." Elliot looked at him. "And what did she tell you to ask for?" Caleb shook his head.
"She said not to ask."
"She said you would know what to do if you remembered who she was." Silence filled the room. Elliot stood and walked to the window. "She trusted me more than I trusted myself," he said. Turning back, he studied Caleb's face. "You came here alone?" "Yes, sir." Elliot's voice softened. That took courage. Elliot called an emergency board meeting that afternoon. The room filled with executives whispering in confusion. "This is highly unusual," one of them said. Elliot raised a hand. "Listen carefully," he began. 35 years ago, a woman named Evelyn Morris helped me survive the hardest years of this company." The room grew quiet. "I made her a promise," he continued, holding up the letter. "Today, I intend to keep it." A board member cleared his throat. "With respect, Elliot, what does this involve?" Elliot answered without hesitation. "A trust fund for her grandson. Full education. Healthcare. Stability." Murmurs spread. "And more," Elliot added. "The boy will live with me." Someone gasped. "That's personal," another said. Elliot's voice was calm but unmovable. "So is loyalty." Later that evening, Elliot returned home with Caleb. The house felt different with footsteps that were not his own. Caleb stood in the doorway, unsure. "You can choose any room," Elliot said. "Dinner will be ready soon." Caleb hesitated. "Sir, why are you doing this?" Elliot paused. "Because your grandmother gave me more than work," he said. "She gave me faith." Caleb smiled faintly. She said you were lonely. Elliot laughed quietly. She was right. They sat at the table, awkward but present. For the first time in years, Elliot felt the silence soften instead of closing in. Days turned into weeks and routines slowly formed. Caleb asked many questions. Why do you work so much? Elliot thought before answering. Because I didn't know what else to do. Caleb frowned. You could do other things. Elliot smiled. I'm learning that. One evening, Caleb showed Elliot an old photo of Evelyn. She used to say you were kind before you were rich. Elliot stared at the image. I hope I can be that man again, he said. At school meetings, Elliot felt out of place but proud. That's my guardian, Caleb told his teacher. The word echoed in Elliot's mind. Guardian. At night, they talked about Evelyn. She believed promises mattered, Caleb said. Elliot nodded. She built my conscience when I had none. He began leaving the office earlier, cooking meals, listening. The board noticed changes. You seem different, Nora said. Elliot replied, I finally am. One night, Caleb asked, Do you regret your life? Elliot considered the question carefully. I regret the time I thought success was enough, he answered. Caleb smiled. You're doing better now. Elliot felt something warm and unfamiliar. Hope. The house no longer felt empty. Laughter replaced echoes. Elliot found joy in small things, helping with homework, attending school events, sharing quiet mornings. One afternoon, Caleb asked, Do you think Grandma would be happy? Elliot knelt beside him. I think she planned this, he said. She knew exactly what she was giving us. Caleb hugged him without warning. Elliot froze, then returned the embrace. Thank you for coming, Elliot whispered. Caleb looked up. Thank you for remembering. In honoring an old promise, Elliot discovered something greater than wealth. He found family, purpose, and a second chance to live a life shaped not by ambition alone, but by connection. As weeks passed, Elliot noticed how his mornings changed. Instead of silence and news reports, he heard Caleb humming while tying his shoes. Do you really need a tie every day? Caleb asked one morning. Elliot chuckled. Old habits are hard to break. Caleb tilted his head. You could wear a sweater like other people. Elliot looked at his reflection and smiled. Maybe I could. At breakfast, Caleb talked about school projects and friends, while Elliot listened carefully, nodding, asking questions. You actually care, Caleb said one day, surprised. Elliot paused. I'm trying to learn how, he replied honestly. At work, Nora noticed the difference. You're smiling more, she said. Elliot replied, There's someone waiting for me at home now. That simple truth changed how he handled business too. He became calmer, more patient. We don't need to rush everything, he told his team. At night, Caleb sometimes struggled to sleep. Do you think people leave because they forget? Caleb asked quietly. Elliot sat beside him. Sometimes they leave because they don't know how to stay, he answered. Caleb nodded slowly. The bond between them grew quietly, built on trust rather than words. One afternoon, Caleb came home upset. A kid at school said I don't belong here, he muttered. Elliot set aside his phone immediately. What did you say? Caleb shrugged. Nothing. Elliot leaned forward. You belong wherever you are loved, he said firmly. Caleb looked at him. Even here? Elliot nodded. Especially here. The next day, Elliot visited the school, not as a powerful businessman, but as a guardian. My grandson deserves respect, he told the principal calmly. On the way home, Caleb whispered, You didn't have to do that. Elliot replied, That's what family does. That word, family, felt less strange each time. At dinner, Caleb asked, Did you ever want kids? Elliot took a deep breath. I think I was afraid, he said. Afraid of failing. Caleb smiled gently. You're not failing now. Elliot felt his chest tighten, but this time it wasn't loneliness. It was something stronger. The holidays arrived faster than Elliot expected. Decorations filled the house with warmth. We need a tree, Caleb announced. Elliot laughed. I've never bought one. At the lot, Caleb ran between trees. This one, he shouted. Elliot examined it. It's crooked. Caleb grinned. So are we. That night, they decorated together. Caleb placed an old photo of Evelyn near the lights. She should be here, he said softly. Elliot nodded. She is, he replied. Over Coco, Caleb asked. Do you miss her? Elliot answered honestly. Every day. He looked at Caleb. But she left me something precious. Caleb smiled. The tree lights glowed, reflecting in Elliot's eyes as he realized the house finally felt alive. Winter brought challenges. Elliot struggled to balance work and home. One night, he arrived late to find Caleb waiting. You said you'd come earlier, Caleb said, hurt. Elliot knelt. I'm sorry. I forgot what mattered. The next day, Elliot canceled meetings. Family emergency, he told the board. Nora raised an eyebrow but smiled. At the park, Caleb laughed as Elliot failed at throwing a ball. You're terrible, Caleb teased. Elliot laughed too. I'm learning. That evening, Elliot wrote a letter of his own, placing it in a drawer. A promise, not of money, but of presence. I won't miss this life, he whispered. Spring brought growth in unexpected ways. Caleb became more confident. I want to be an engineer, he said proudly. Elliot smiled. I know someone who can help. They built small projects together. Why did you start your company? Caleb asked. Elliot thought carefully. To prove I could survive. Caleb replied, You already did. That simple sentence stayed with Elliot. At school, Caleb introduced Elliot as his grandfather without hesitation. Elliot felt tears sting his eyes. He didn't correct him. He didn't need to. One evening, Elliot found Caleb reading Evelyn's old journal. Is it okay? Caleb asked. Elliot nodded. She wrote about you, Caleb said. Elliot sat down. What did she say? Caleb smiled. That you were stubborn but good. Elliot laughed. That sounds right. Caleb continued. She hoped you wouldn't end up alone. Elliot closed his eyes briefly. She saved me, he said. Caleb placed the journal down. She brought us together. Elliot nodded. Yes, she did. As the year passed, Elliot's health improved. He walked more, laughed more. Doctors noticed. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it, one said. Elliot smiled. At home, Caleb asked, Are you scared of getting old? Elliot answered honestly. Not anymore. Caleb grinned. Good. I need you. Elliot hugged him gently. I'm here, he promised. The board eventually accepted Elliot's changes. You've changed the company culture, one member admitted. Elliot replied, People matter more than profit. At a charity event, Elliot spoke publicly for the first time about Evelyn. This company was built on loyalty, he said. Caleb watched proudly. That's my grandpa, he whispered to Nora. She smiled. Yes, it is. One quiet night, Caleb asked, Do you think Grandma knew this would happen? Elliot answered softly. She believed in love more than plans. Caleb nodded. I think she'd like this life. Elliot looked around the warm room. I think she built it, he replied. Years later, Caleb grew taller, stronger, wiser. Elliot watched with pride. You're becoming your own person, Elliot said. Caleb replied, Because you let me. Elliot smiled. Because you taught me. Their bond had become unbreakable, shaped by shared loss and shared hope. One afternoon, Caleb found the old letter again. This started everything, he said. Elliot nodded. But it wasn't the letter, he replied. It was the promise behind it. Caleb folded it carefully. Promises matter, he said. Elliot smiled. They always have. As Elliot aged, he slowed down, but never withdrew. Caleb stayed close. You're not alone, Caleb reminded him. Elliot replied, I never will be again. The house remained full of warmth, even in silence. On a peaceful evening, Elliot told Caleb, You were my greatest success. Caleb shook his head. We were. Elliot laughed softly. Yes, he agreed. We were. When people spoke of Elliot Grayson, they no longer spoke only of wealth. They spoke of kindness, loyalty, and a promise kept. Caleb carried that story forward, sharing it with pride. One promise changed everything, he would say. In the end, Elliot understood the true meaning of inheritance. It was not money or power, but love passed from one heart to another. A promise made long ago had returned, not as a demand, but as a gift. And in keeping it, Elliot Grayson found the life he never knew he needed. Life continued to move forward, but now it did so with intention. Elliot no longer measured his days by meetings alone, but by moments. Mornings became slower, filled with conversation. Did you know breakfast tastes better when you sit down? Caleb joked one day. Elliot smiled. I'm starting to believe that. They began a habit of walking together every evening. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they didn't. Silence isn't lonely anymore, Elliot said once. Caleb nodded. Because it's shared. That simple truth settled deeply in Elliot's heart. He realized that presence was not loud or impressive, it was steady. For the first time in his life, he felt rooted rather than driven. As Caleb entered his teenage years, questions grew deeper. One night he asked, "What if I disappoint you?" Elliot looked at him carefully. "You don't owe me perfection," he said. "You owe yourself honesty." Caleb thought about that. "Did you ever disappoint yourself?" Elliot answered slowly. "Yes. When I ignored people who mattered." Caleb replied, "You're fixing that now." Elliot smiled. "Because you reminded me how." Their conversations became lessons for both of them, shaped by listening rather than instruction. Elliot began preparing for the future in quiet ways. He updated his will, not with fear, but with clarity. "This isn't about money," he told his lawyer. "It's about care." At home, Caleb noticed Elliot sorting old papers. "Throwing things away?" he asked. Elliot shook his head. "Letting go of what no longer defines me." He handed Caleb a box. "These are memories. Help me decide what stays." Together, they laughed at old photos and stories. The past no longer felt heavy, it felt complete. One afternoon, Caleb invited a friend over for the first time. He hesitated at the door. "Is it okay?" Elliot smiled. "This is your home." Later, Elliot overheard Caleb say, "My grandpa saved me." Elliot stepped away quietly, emotion tightening his chest. That night, he said, "You saved me too." Caleb looked surprised. "I just showed up." Elliot replied, "Sometimes that's enough." The house echoed with youthful voices, and Elliot welcomed the noise as proof of life. As Elliot's health slowed him, he became more reflective. "I used to think strength meant control," he told Caleb during a checkup wait. "Now I think it means trust." Caleb nodded. "You trust me?" Elliot smiled. "With my whole heart." Caleb squeezed his hand. "Then rest. I've got you." The roles were not reversed, but shared. That balance brought Elliot peace. Caleb's graduation day arrived sooner than Elliot expected. Sitting in the crowd, Elliot clapped louder than anyone. "That's my grandson," he said proudly. After the ceremony, Caleb hugged him tightly. "You kept your promise," Caleb said. Elliot shook his head. "Your grandmother did. I just followed it." Caleb smiled. "She chose well." Elliot felt tears, but didn't hide them. That summer, they visited Evelyn's resting place together. Caleb placed fresh flowers. "Thank you," he whispered. Elliot stood beside him. "You changed my life," he said softly. The wind moved gently through the trees, and for a moment, both felt her presence, not as loss, but as guidance. They left feeling lighter, carrying gratitude instead of grief. As Caleb prepared for college, Elliot felt both pride and fear. "You'll be far away," Elliot admitted. Caleb replied, "Distance doesn't erase love." Elliot smiled. "You sound wiser than your years." Caleb laughed. "I learned from you." On move-in day, Elliot lingered. "Call me," he said. Caleb hugged him. "Every week." Elliot nodded. "I'll be waiting." The house grew quieter again, but not empty. Elliot filled his days with reading, mentoring young entrepreneurs, and writing letters to Caleb. "I'm learning patience," he wrote once. Caleb replied, "I'm learning courage." Their bond stretched across miles, unbroken by space. Years passed gently. Caleb returned often, bringing stories, dreams, and laughter. "You built something good here," Caleb said one visit. Elliot replied, "We did." They sat together, older now but still connected. Time had softened Elliot's edges, leaving wisdom behind. One evening, Elliot felt tired in a different way. He called Caleb. "Come home," he said simply. Caleb arrived the next day. "I'm here," he said. Elliot smiled. "That's all I need." They talked late into the night, about everything and nothing. There were no regrets left unspoken. In his final days, Elliot was calm. "I was afraid of dying once," he told Caleb. "Now I'm not." Caleb held his hand. "You're not alone." Elliot nodded. "I never was after you came." His voice was steady, full of gratitude. When Elliot passed, the house held quiet respect rather than sorrow. Caleb stood strong, honoring him not with sadness, but with purpose. At the memorial, people spoke of Elliot's kindness as much as his success. Caleb listened, knowing the full story behind the words. Caleb later took on Elliot's work, not to chase power, but to protect values. "This company was built on a promise," he told the board. "We will keep it alive." They listened because they believed him. Elliot's legacy lived on, shaped by compassion. And so the story ended where it truly began, with loyalty, love, and a promise remembered. A young boy who arrived with nothing but faith, and an old man who found everything he was missing. What passed between them was not inheritance, but connection. And that, more than wealth, became their lasting gift. After the memorial, Caleb stayed in the house longer than planned. The room still carried Elliot's presence, not as a shadow, but as a comfort. Caleb walked through the study, touching the desk where Elliot once worked late into the night. "You tell me not to rush," Caleb said aloud, smiling faintly. He found a small note taped inside a drawer, written in Elliot's careful handwriting. "Take your time. Life listens when you slow down." Caleb sat quietly and let the words settle. He realized grief did not always mean pain. Sometimes it meant responsibility. "I'll do my best," he whispered, feeling steadier than he expected. Returning to the company was not easy, but Caleb did not do it alone. Nora Blake greeted him warmly. "He trusted you," she said. Caleb nodded. "He taught me." In meetings, Caleb listened more than he spoke. When someone asked, "What's your vision?" Caleb replied simply, "People first." There was silence, then agreement. The company began new programs for employees' families and education. "This feels different," one manager said. Caleb smiled. "It's meant to." Elliot's values guided every choice, like a quiet voice offering direction. Outside of work, Caleb built a life grounded in balance. He volunteered at schools, telling students, "One person believing in you can change everything." At home, he kept Evelyn's journal and Elliot's letters on a shelf. Friends noticed the calm he carried. "You're steady," one said. Caleb replied, "I was taught how." He understood now that strength did not come from avoiding loss, but from honoring what love had given him. Years later, Caleb returned to the park where Elliot once struggled to throw a ball. He laughed at the memory. "You tried," he said to the empty bench. Children played nearby, their laughter bright. Caleb felt gratitude instead of sadness. He realized that the past did not pull him backward, it pushed him forward. "I'm still learning," he said softly, knowing Elliot would approve. Caleb eventually married and started a family of his own. On quiet evenings, he told his children stories. "Your great-grandmother believed in promises," he would say. "Your grandfather believed in second chances." The children listened closely. "And you?" one asked. Caleb smiled. "I believe in showing up." He meant it with his whole heart. On anniversaries, Caleb visited Evelyn and Elliot together. He placed flowers and spoke aloud. "Your promise kept growing," he said. The wind moved gently, and Caleb felt peace. He no longer needed answers. He had purpose. The circle felt complete, yet alive. The company thrived, but Caleb never chased growth for its own sake. "We're caretakers," he reminded his team, "of people of trust." Those words became part of the culture. New employees learned the story early on, not as legend, but as lesson. Success without kindness is unfinished, Caleb would say. In quiet moments, Caleb still read Elliot's letters. One line stood out. Love arrives when you make room for it. Caleb closed the letter and looked around his full home. He understood now that room was made through choice, courage, and patience. Time continued, gentle and sure. Caleb aged with gratitude rather than fear. When asked about his success, he answered, I was given a chance to belong. People nodded, sensing the truth behind the words. The promise that began decades earlier had become a living legacy. And so the story rested, not with an ending, but with continuity. A promise written in ink had turned into a life written in care. What began as a claim became a connection, and what grew from that connection became a family, a company, and a way of living. In remembering loyalty and choosing love, they proved that the greatest inheritance is the courage to keep a promise and to let it change you. After everything settled, Caleb realized there were still parts of Elliot he had never fully explored. One evening, while sorting through boxes in the attic, he found a small recorder wrapped in cloth. Curious, he pressed play. Elliot's voice filled the space, calm and thoughtful. If you're hearing this, I finally learned how to speak without rushing. Caleb sat down slowly, listening as Elliot talked about mistakes, lessons, and gratitude. I hope you choose people over pride, Elliot said. Caleb smiled through tears. I will, he whispered. The recording didn't feel like goodbye. It felt like guidance. Caleb decided to take a break from the company for a short time. I need to understand who I am outside of all this, he told the board. They agreed. He traveled, not far, but with purpose, visiting places Evelyn once mentioned in her stories. In a small-town cafe, someone asked, What brings you here? Caleb replied, I'm following a promise. The words felt right. Everywhere he went, he listened more than he spoke, learning how ordinary kindness shaped lives. When Caleb returned, he came back clearer. He met with Nora first. I don't want to lead like Elliot, he said carefully. Nora smiled. Good, she replied. He wanted you to lead like yourself. Caleb nodded. That became his approach, steady, honest, open. He created mentorship programs and opened doors for those who reminded him of Evelyn, loyal, overlooked, patient. Talent grows when it's trusted, he told his team. At home, Caleb kept Elliot's chair by the window. He didn't sit in it often, but he liked knowing it was there. One rainy afternoon, a neighbor's child asked, Who used to live here? Caleb answered, Someone who taught me how to care. The child nodded, as if that made perfect sense. Caleb realized then that stories lived on in simple explanations. Years later, Caleb was invited to speak at a school. A student asked, What changed your life? Caleb thought carefully. Someone kept a promise they could have ignored, he said. And someone else believed that promise mattered. The room grew quiet. You don't need to be powerful to change a life, he added. You just need to show up. Caleb eventually opened a foundation in Evelyn's name. At the opening, he spoke softly. This isn't about charity, he said. It's about continuity. People listened. The foundation focused on education and stability, the same gifts that had shaped his life. Caleb felt Evelyn's presence strongly that day, not as memory, but as movement. On a quiet anniversary, Caleb cooked Elliot's favorite meal. He set 2 plates out of habit, then laughed gently at himself. Still learning, he said aloud. He ate slowly, grateful. The house no longer felt like something he inherited. It felt like something he earned through care. As time passed, Caleb became known not for wealth, but for consistency. He listens, people said. That was the highest praise to him. In moments of doubt, he returned to Elliot's words. Life listens when you slow down. Caleb made slowing down his strength. One evening, Caleb wrote a letter of his own and placed it beside Elliot's old promise. It wasn't for anyone specific. It simply read, I will choose people. I will keep what matters alive. Folding it carefully, he felt complete. The story did not end with loss or gain, but with continuation. A promise made in uncertainty became a life built with intention. Through loyalty, patience, and love, generations were quietly connected. And in that connection, the true inheritance endured, unchanging, steady, and deeply human.